Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel The Post The Coder. Let's learn something new today. Today we can learn usage of ConfigAwait in asynchronous programming. Asynchronous programming widely used in these days. With the help of asynchronous programming, we can increase the application performance and enhance the user experience of the application. Everyone will know whenever we run the asynchronous code, it will always run on a different thread. By default, if you run any asynchronous method, that method always set as config await true by default. So this config await is a beautiful feature which is available in asynchronous programming. Let's see what is config await and the usage in asynchronous programming. For understanding, here I am taking one yellow box. This is my code block. And as usually, whenever if you run any code, by default, that code is running on main thread or UI thread. So inside my code block, I am creating one asynchronous operation. That is, I am taking await get data. So whenever we are all know, if you run any asynchronous method, it will run on the different thread, not on the default thread that is main thread or UI thread. So once this await operation is completed, the default behavior of this asynchronous programming, it will return back to the original context. That means whatever the thread before this asynchronous operation is running, it will return back to the same thread. So here you can see that first my code block is running on the main thread or UI thread. Once asynchronous operation is executing at that time, this operation only will run on a different thread. Once this asynchronous operation is completed, it will return back to the my main thread or UI thread or original context. This is the by default behavior of the asynchronous programming. So this is the default behavior of the asynchronous method or config await true behavior. So summary, whenever set the config await to true, so once the asynchronous programming or asynchronous method is completed, it will return back to the original thread or original context. But we can set manually config await false also. Next, we can see the behavior of this config await false. If you want to set config await false, manually we can set for config await false for the asynchronous method in this way. After our asynchronous method, we can write like dot config await false. In this manner, we can set config await false. Here, once we set the config await false, we can see some different behavior. For example, in this yellow black, we can take it as our code black. Once this code block started executing, by default, it will run on a main thread or UI thread. For example, we can consider this thread name is thread 1. Once our asynchronous method started executing, this part of this code will run on a different thread. Maybe we can consider that thread name is thread 2. So whenever this asynchronous method execution is completed, the remaining code will run on a different thread, or it is in the same thread which is running on our asynchronous method. This is the behavior difference we can see when we set the config await false. So for example, so our asynchronous method is running on a thread 2. Once this asynchronous method completes execution is completed, the remaining code will be running on a thread 2 or the thread 3. So thread 2 is the asynchronous operation thread, or thread 3 is the completely different thread. This is the main difference. Let's jump into the Visual Studio and see practically the behavior of the config await false and config await true. Here I am creating one Xamarin Forms application, and in my UI I am creating one list view. This list view will display the holidays data. Inside my view model, I am creating one method get API data, and this method will be called inside my constructor. So inside this get API data, I am calling one get data API and get the data from this API. Whenever the data is getting from this API, I am assigning this data to the my list view. So for our config await false and true behavioral understanding, inside this get API data method, I'm note down the thread, which thread this lines of code is executing. So initially, whenever we are calling get API data, I note down the what is the thread this lines of code will be executing. So here I'm taking the original thread ID. So once our asynchronous method execution is completed, again I'm note down the what is the thread this remaining code will be executing. So that's why I'm take note down the again what which thread this remaining code will be executing. So by comparing this original thread ID and the current thread ID, we can see the behavioral difference of the ConfigAwait true and ConfigAwait false. In case of ConfigAwait true condition, so whatever the thread this lines of code start executing will be same as the remaining lines after the our asynchronous method code execution will be same. So here the expected behavior is original thread ID and the current thread ID will be same. So this is the our behavior of the ConfigAwait true. Now I'm running the application and we can see. So this whenever this get API data method is called, this started the lines of code inside this method is started executing inside the original thread ID is one. So once this asynchronous operation is called, these lines of code will be running on a different thread. Whenever this asynchronous method execution is completed, the remaining code will be running on which thread we can see. So the remaining code also it will running on the thread one. This is the our config await true behavior. So whenever we are setting config await true, whatever the thread initially it started executing, after completion of the our asynchronous operation, the remaining code will also running on the previous thread at the original context. That's why our original thread ID and the current thread ID will be same. So both these lines of code and these lines of code will be started executing on the same thread. Now we can see the config await set as false and the what is the behavioral difference. So here the expected behavior is once this get API data is called, it will run on the one thread or we can consider a main thread. Once our asynchronous method execution is completed, the remaining lines of code means these lines of code run on a different thread. It will not match with the original thread. Let's run our application and see practically. Here you can see that once this method is called, it started executing on the original thread ID is 1. Now we are continue the application and we can see after completion of this asynchronous method execution, the remaining code which code executing on which thread. Here you can see that the remaining lines of code it will run on a different thread, that is thread ID 10. So this is the difference when we set it as a config await false. So here the original thread ID is 1 and the current thread ID is 10. So whenever we are setting the config await is false, after whatever the original thread ID initially started executing and after the completion of our asynchronous operation, the remaining lines of code will be running on a different thread. It will not run on the original thread. This is the behavioral difference and the usage of the config await false. So based on our scenarios and our requirement, we can set our config await false.
Thank you for watching our videos. Please like, share and subscribe my channel Deepu's Decoder.